You're listening to TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour with your host, the Director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
TBR Radio presents the Dixie Heritage Hour. Our guest this week is Paul Angel. Paul is the editor-in-chief of the Barnes Review Magazine. And once again, we have him as our guest so that we can discuss the up-and-coming new issue of the Barnes Review Magazine, the July-August issue of the Barnes Review Magazine. Today is July 6th, and the Barnes Review of July and August is in the mail, and it's on its way to you. If you're a subscriber, you'll be receiving it any day now. If you're not a subscriber, or if you're an online subscriber, you can go to the website and you can download it. And you'll want to do that because it's already up there. It's a great issue, jam-packed. And so here is our interview with...
We do something about illegal immigration or fuss about it 25 years ago. So I believe we should blame ourselves, make ourselves better.
Cover of the upcoming July-August issue, Harry Elmer Barnes, the man, his times, and his legacy of truth. Of course, it is the Barnes Review, and so this is an issue that's dedicated to our namesake. So who was Harry Elmer Barnes?
Well, Harry Elmer Barnes is looked upon as the father of historical revisionism. And as I was telling you off air before we began our interview, Barnes was a guy who was fooled by government propaganda for years before World War I. He was born in 1889, died in August of 1968, which is why he is featured on the cover of the July-August issue of the Barnes Review. So listen, he was a well-respected American historian for a while, and he taught at Columbia University during a little bit after World War I. He was a freelance writer. He was a prolific writer, and so as I mentioned to you, before World War I, he was completely taken in by the war propaganda and began writing anti-German pieces, which were so virulently anti-German that even the propaganda departments of the United States so rejected them. But being an open-minded guy and a real scholar who believed in looking at facts, he decided after the war was over, after he had begun a little bit of research about it, especially about the causes of the war, and believing that the war guilt should not be assigned to Germany only. Of course, this was a complete flip-flop. But he didn't really come to this opinion. He was leaning that way, but he went over and started talking to the Axis leaders. I think he met with the Kaiser, he met with some Austrians, and he did a little bit of research. As you know, history changes because documents are released, and in our own country, we know we learned quite a bit from released documents about his assassination of Kennedy, et cetera, et cetera. And he completely changed his mind. By the time he came back, he had believed that the Germans were about the only European power at the time who had actually been working diligently for peace. And when he looked at it, he began to believe that the bankers and the industrialists and the global elite, we'll call them, were manipulating things from behind the scenes as well. But there's also documentation released about the Serbian involvement. There's always a big debate. Who caused World War I? Who started World War I? Well, the Americans and the Brits and the French like to say the Germans did it. But Barnes, I think, came to believe that Serbians were as culpable as anybody for that war. Interestingly, he was a Serb, right, who, Gavrilo Princip, who knocked off the Archduke, who was one of the heirs to the throne, Franz Ferdinand, right, and his wife Sophie in Sarajevo. An interesting story behind that, too, just of the calamity of errors that ended up leading Princip to the spot he was on the corner there drinking a cup of coffee after they practically missed their chance to knock him off, and there they were, the Austro-Hungarian royalty, and he just popped out and shot him. But anyway, it turns out that there was a lot of subterfuge going on that Barnes was able to discern from the secret documents that were released. Serbia would refuse to do an investigation, an internal investigation. They agreed almost to it. Austria was obviously mad that they had knocked off the emperor was, right, Franz Joseph, right, and this was I think his younger brother, right, Franz Ferdinand. And so he was mad, but he kept patient, and he asked for the multiple points for the Serbians to agree on. The Serbians were looking to regain, I believe, Montenegro and another one of their little principalities that's part of Yugoslavia now. So it turned out that the guy. It turned out that one of the guys was tied in was I forget they called him Apis the Bull, was one of these the Serbian military officers, and he had been communicating in some fashion through secret avenues or communiques with these group of assassins, and they were really just a bunch of muggers and street thugs who ended up killing the Sophie and Franz Ferdinand. But it turned out that this guy was also at the center of knocking off King Alexander, I believe, and Queen Draga. Remember that from Serbia earlier. So here's just one guy that pops up that nobody even knew about, who seems to have been involved in an attempt to wipe out the existing monarchical situation or secession in Serbia. And then all of a sudden he's tied directly to the killing off of part of the royal house of the Austrians. And so Barnes looked at that, and in the end, he wrote a book, right? One of his bigger books. Although I must say, as he wrote these books and changed his mind about German war guilt and war in general, that was the first black mark against him from the establishment, because he was becoming a pacifist. Said war was unnecessary. War only enriched the bankers and the industrialists and the armaments makers. Very rarely does the common man in any way profit from war. He just does the dying and the bleeding and the paying. But he wrote the Genesis of the World War, I believe it was called. And in it, the establishment didn't really like what they saw there, because he tried to exonerate, and to some degree, to his belief was the truth, any culpability for the Germans. And he was starting to place the blame on the Russians and Franco-industrial, French, Russo and Franco-industrialists and others. And so that was his first black mark. Well, by the time he came along, he started analyzing years later World War II, for instance, and Pearl Harbor, and our treatment of the Japanese, how we had nearly manipulated them into the war. The Japanese were doing quite well, of course, taking over Manchuria and in China, and they were brutally efficient in the Southeast Asia. But Barnes's analysis of the communiques and correspondence between the Japanese and the Americans convinced him that the Americans' ultimate goal was to force Japan into attacking us. I think Roosevelt even said that one time, that was never their goal. And so then he started to realize that wars were ridiculous. We could stay out of them, and millions of people would survive. And so by this time, Barnes couldn't get his books published by any major publisher, any mainstream publishing house, and he was published his own stuff. And would have been, by the way, there were other well-known at this point in time, and also smeared in that era. Historians were working at the same time. One of his friends was Charles Beard. Charles Beard will pop up, perhaps, Ed, in one of your old U.S. history textbooks, maybe even one. I had one here. I was surprised. I believe it was from the early 60s, maybe before, with Beard and Barnes as editor. Just U.S. American history was a textbook for schools. Well, those days were long gone for both of them. There's an article about Beard in this, and he and Barnes were both smeared and discredited and vilified, et cetera, everything they could do to stop their work. But anyway, by this time, Barnes was persona non grata. But that's okay, because he ended up meeting Willis Carto, and he met many, many people at the time. He was an associate. Barnes was, in intellectual circles, was talking to all kinds of writers who were also kind of blacklisted at the time. But of course, Willis Carto in 1955 started Liberty Lobby, and he also had the Institute for Historical Review going. Later on, I believe in the 70s maybe, he had Liberty Lobby. He had the Spotlight newspaper. He had, and specifically the Institute for Historical Review, in which they began to talk about war guilt, and again the driving forces behind these ridiculously expensive and bloody wars that did nothing for the Europeans or the Americans. To be honest with you, it's been nothing but disaster since then. And so they became acquaintances, and Carto, of course, being a contrarian publisher, a nationalist, was quite interested in the piece. message of Barnes and published some of his books, and they chit-chatted and talked about things. Barnes was an interesting guy. I can't tell you all about this guy. The Wikipedia article, to some degree, if you go there, it does have some very interesting stuff about Barnes. I mean, he was a free thinker. In some respects, he was a liberal. In some respects, he was conservative. But in the end, Willis was so impressed with Barnes. Barnes died in 1968, August, so that's why we dedicated this cover to him and this issue. He was so impressed by the man that when Willis started this historical magazine in 1994, he named it after him, called the Barnes Review. And so the Barnes had some famous quotes. The first casualty of war is the truth. Revisionism is to what's our own motto on the front. Read it off the cover for me. Bring history. That's actually page 2. Bring history in accord with the facts. Look at the facts. Don't let wartime propaganda color you. And so then, if you think that Barnes was persona non grata in the 1940s or 1950s, whenever he was writing his book on World War II, the causes of World War II, then wait till he started talking about the Germans and the World War II concentration camps, and that was it. Right then he was just known as a horrible anti-Semite because he had questions about the number of Jewish victims and Gypsy victims and Soviet victims and American victims of German concentration camps, and the possibility that gas chambers were not used to kill them, and most of them died of disease and starvation. He was like the first guy who openly discussed this stuff, although Willis always said it was David Hogan, the author of The Forced War, who had given him a secret manuscript many years before to publish, which we do sell. It's called The Myth of the 6 Million, I believe. But after that, Barnes was pretty much done. But Barnes was still popular amongst this movement he had created in revisionism. Now, our lead article is by Barnes in this issue, and it's his famous, and believe me, he's fighting it today. It was so apropos. It was about the smother out, what he called of history. And he talked about how mainstream academia had no interest in giving you the truth, that it was their job to foment and continue on the myths of the victors who write the history. And a very good article. I mean, you just see how intelligent the man was. And you mentioned this to me. What did you say to me about Barnes? He was one of the most intelligent people you ever read, or something. Well, you were impressed by him. If you're impressed by him, then I'm impressed by him. So just to know. But anyway, so he talks about it. He talks about what the honest scholar goes through, the methods that they use to smother out the history, why they do it. Why, for instance, a guy like Hitler, let's say Hitler wasn't the most evil man in history. Well, he kind of has to be for us to justify the fact that we sided up with that butcher Stalin, right? And the Soviets, the communists, who were just continuing on the legacy of Lenin and Trotsky, right? More or less. I mean, they had different views of what you might call Trotskyism and Bolshevism and communism, one being more international and one being more domestic. But the fact of the matter was we were teaming up with the butcher. You can't have that come out in history, especially when the death toll for the Soviets from the early 1920s to 1960 was in the 60 to 70 million dead range. Well, that doesn't work. So Barnes understood that when you find a guy like Hitler, you got to make him the worst enemy, the worst evil person that the world has ever seen. Otherwise, your bogus narrative doesn't really have much of a foundation. So over the years, by the way, Willis attracted many of these guys who couldn't get their work published. And the Institute for Historical Review, up until the early 1980s, I still think they try, publish these amazing wealth of information. And most of these guys were inspired by or worked with Harry Elmer Barnes. He was at the core of this whole movement. This magazine wouldn't be around without him. Not that we wouldn't have somebody to name it after, but it just wouldn't exist because he's the one who practically, and you wouldn't think that you would have to invent this. Look at the facts, see where the facts take you, then make a conclusion. You know as well as I do in the news media today, it's the exact opposite, right? You're given the conclusion, and then you backtrack and figure out a narrative that works with the bogus facts you have. It's about the whole monument teardown stuff. It's about black on white violence or cops killing innocent black people in numbers that are dwarfed by what they're killing each other in the inner cities, poor things. And until, by the way, they get over that victimhood narrative that they've been given, I don't think they're going anywhere. And it's part of the plan to castrate them as a race, I believe. But anyway, that being said, he influenced a lot of people. So that lead article was about the smother out. That was good stuff. And then we had an article by a very intelligent man. He used a pseudonym. His name is Antonius. He may say Antonius J. Patrick. And he can't put his name on an article in this day and age defending in any way the beliefs of Barnes, or at least their method, or their modus operandi, how they get from point A to point B in the factual narrative. And he talks about Beard, and that was interesting too. I didn't know Charles Beard was completely deaf, and so one of the ways that they could smear him, his critics, because he came to believe that bankers and industrialists as well were manipulating history and setting things up, and that the global elite was the ones that, et cetera, the same line that we've been harping on for so long that the American First Party harped on in the days of Charles Lindbergh. But anyway, that's a very good story. And so at the end of the article, of course, here's a guy who's extremely intelligent, involved in academia, has an open mind, the man who wrote this story. I can't even put his name on the story for fear that he's going to be hounded at his door by Antifa or his employers or anybody else. And what he says is completely reasonable. Completely reasonable. It's kind of what we say throughout the magazine. And of course, another protege of Willis is Matt Johnson, Dr. Matt Johnson from Pennsylvania, and he has an article on Bela Kun. Now, here's an article that could not appear in any other magazine, possibly of any significance in this country, about Bela Kun, World War I, the 1919 Hungarian Revolution, in which he firmly believed that this was a Jewish nationalist movement. And there's really no animosity in the article that I see. He uses words a lot that would inflame people, I imagine, because they simply aren't used today in this politically correct age. But again, you would almost say that as Johnson was a protege of Cardo, then he is, and by extension, a protege of Barnes. So Barnes has effect not only on his contemporaries, but amongst young people coming up today. There's very few people in our movement who don't know who Barnes is or don't appreciate the work. By the way, as you looked through that issue, was there any particular articles you wanted to cover in a more in-depth way, or do you want me to just go ahead and go on? And
I was particularly interested in the decapitation of a Christian dynasty.
That's the good stuff. People might say we covered that a lot, but again, we had a lot of anniversaries this year. In 2018, that's 1918. I think 1917 was a revolution, one in the early part of the year, one in the later part of the year, and people don't really know what happened. The Romanovs, of course, were killed in 1918, but I didn't realize that the Soviets had gone after every single member of the Romanov dynasty. Brothers, sons, uncles, aunts, widows who were there, nuns. So one of the sister of the empress had become a nun after her husband had died earlier, or that there was a tie into so many royal houses. We all know Queen Victoria had a lot of relatives, and that was it Edward and Nicholas II. Which I don't know which Edward it was, Edward the Fifth, Sixth, Seventh. It was one of those that they were all related, and they were cousins. When they would wipe out the Romanovs, well, they were wiping out relatives of many of the major European powers at the time, and they sat by and did just about nothing. But yeah, it was horrible. I don't want to really give away that article. Michael Walsh is well versed in this particular subject. Not only that, he comes with a lot of great photographs. We could have run many more photographs than that. But to see these fine young Christian people who had really done nothing, the allegation that the Romanov dynasty was far removed from the people of Russia, the poor serfs of Russia, is such baloney. They got their hands dirtier than anybody going in to help the poor, to hand out foodstuffs, to try to show up, to rally people, to give them some hope, to support Christian efforts in Russia, to make life better for the poor class as opposed to running these almost fictitious pogroms that they're all alleged to have run at the time.
Well, conventional history tells us that Russia was impoverished and that communism was supposed to be the economic salvation of Russia. But if you look at the statistics, capitalism might have been working better in Russia than it was in the United States at the time.
I believe it. It was probably from the reforms of the earlier Romanovs as well. So, yeah, it's all a myth. A lot of it's a myth. In this particular article, you'll be outraged by the treatment of the Romanovs, but just in the brutal way in which they were assassinated. Let me think. I think it was one of Nicholas II's nephews. He had 3 nephews by his younger brother, Nikolai, I think. And, they didn't bother with it. They took him out to a mine shaft, It's negative 20 degrees Celsius, -1 Fahrenheit, I think it came out to. And they're telling them to strip down, practically naked in this freezing weather. And then just push them into the mine shaft. And the mine shaft's approximately, I think we figured out, was about 65 or 65 to 85 foot deep. And some of them were breaking their bones. And poor women in there. Again, one was a nun who had been the widow of one of the brothers of Nicholas II. Hope I'm not wrong there, it's possible. But it was a close relative, and she had become a nun after the husband had died. And, well, they didn't care. They pushed her in there. And then they pushed some of their servants in there and their secretaries in there. And then they threw a grenade in there. And then, though only a couple of them died, they actually, down with broken bones and internal, and they're surviving for weeks, perhaps, before they starved to death. So he goes through this whole list and these beautiful pictures of these wonderful people and the just brutality of their slaughter. What always got me was why the rest of Europe would sit by and just gloss over this stuff. You never hear about this stuff, the treatment of it, or that it was almost a particularly one ethnic group trying to wipe out Christianity. He is going to do some, Michael Walsh is going to do some additional articles. He had one in a previous issue about the wiping out of Christianity in general in Russia by the communists, the tear down of the churches, the looting of the churches, the selling of this massive amount. Yes, capitalism was probably alive and well there, as people always think it's the impoverished who were the first ones to jump onto the redistribution of wealth, which is what you'd think. But that really it's the lower middle class that is what you need. And of course, this is exactly who was harmed the most by communism in Russia, as far as I can tell. Yeah, that's an extremely good pictorial article. There's a long running story that goes along with it. He had some very interesting pieces. He submitted a piece late on a mystery photograph that had been found in the archives, and a lot of stuff has come out in Russia now. They're talking about this stuff now. Remember, Russia is supposed to be the place where all information is censored by the state, right? Well, that's not true. It's here in the United States and in Western Europe where this is happening, where people get locked up and people are losing their jobs. And one guy here in the United States, right, killed himself because he was hounded by Antifa and fired from his job and everything else. But here they're talking about this again. It's 2018. It's the big 100-year anniversary of the slaughter of the Romanovs, and lots of stuff is coming out about this. And it's good that things are being talked about. I don't know if you would really see an article. You might see this article in Russia, but you wouldn't see this article in any other American publication.
What I find interesting about that is that all of the royal families of Europe were interrelated through, blood and marriage. And so where were the other royal houses of Europe when this was happening? Because essentially it was their own family that was being slaughtered. So where was the British royal family or the Norwegian royal family or the Danish royal family? Pick your European monarchy. Where were they while their cousins were being slaughtered?
Sitting by quietly, evidently.
And so apparently the bankers must have had that much hold over them that they would just sit by passively and allow their family to be slaughtered like that.
Well, sure, that is one of their ways of working and gaining influence, as we've known for many generations, to offer loans at amounts that can never be paid back, And so, unfortunately, too many royal houses at the time were taking advantage of the moneylenders, and this goes way back, even to the time of the Templars, right? I mean, this is one of the reasons they were wiped out, I think, is because they held so much debt of the royal houses. So it's the same story that's been going on forever. I will say that modern technology, photography, and even in this era, more so than then, but really allowed things to be documented like never before. I always wondered, wouldn't it have been nice to have been able to have moving pictures in the times of the Romans so we actually knew what was happening? But I have no idea. They were either that or they were too scared because they knew pretty easily what could happen. And this was regime change is what was happening back then as it is happening today. And I imagine they thought they might be in a chop block. A lot of these royal houses were just happy as clams that they could get through the war and still be in power. And these were some of the smaller nations around. Who knows? I don't know what really happened in Sweden or Norway or Denmark and in World War I. I mean, it's a lesson. It's a lesson to be learned that even though one of the most powerful Christian monarchs in the world could be so easily ousted and then treated so profanely without anyone raising really a hand or a voice in objection. So, yeah, there's powers that are greater than the Christian monarchs of the time. That's for sure. But, it's funny when Russia's your ally in World War I, which they were for a little while. You want to keep your ally, and you have other concerns, fighting two front wars, who's going to be fighting Germany on the other side, et cetera, et cetera. You don't really care who gets slaughtered. It's like the end of World War II. Did we not know when we handed over Eastern Europe to the Soviets that there was going to be a bloodbath? But I do believe Russians were bounded. The very fact they're talking about this, the very fact that their Christian faith lasted through this horrific period, and they tried to wipe it out, but they couldn't. The Russians were devout. At any rate, I think that's definitely an article that people would want to find and take a look at in the Barnes Review. And I know you'll plug us an advertisement in there, but great looking magazine, lots of other stuff in there. There's other articles in there about other topics. I think a print copy is $10, and if you subscribe, it's $36 for a year with this in PDF format. Or you can get the print and the PDF for just $56. It's well worth it. You're never going to see anything like this anywhere else. For instance, in that issue, I got 2 articles by you.
We'll talk about my 2 articles here in a minute, but first, a word from our sponsor, the Barnes Review. If you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading the Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading the Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, that's www.barnesreview.org, you can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you can subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
I think a lot of our listeners will know that there's a disaster happening in South Africa. But your article in particular talked about the farm murders and how they really shouldn't be farm murders. It's really a genocide. And at that rate, there won't be too many left.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It's as though the government of South Africa has basically told the black people to murder the white people and take their property with impunity. Don't worry about it, because we're not going to prosecute you. We're not going to punish you. There'll be no consequence under the law. Just go take what you want. It's almost like government-sanctioned anarchy that's resulting in thousands of deaths every week.
Here, you don't hear much in the nightly news about this. And the brutality you described, and by the way, there's a follow-up article afterwards by Clint Lacey, talking more or less about how there you have 2 choices here. You can either stay and probably die, or you can flee. And the fact of the matter is, the United States government...
Where would they flee to? Because the other countries aren't giving them asylum. They're not taking them.
So Clint's article is an urge for the United States government to get involved and give these people fast-track asylum here. And I think about these Boer and British farmers, for a lot of them, right? Man, just what we need here. Hardworking people to come over here. They speak English. They respect Western civilization, I believe.
I say if they were black African Muslims, they would be fast-tracked here and given asylum status.
That's correct. And I think that, as I've said before, if we were the white tiger instead of the white people, well, they'd be out there trying to preserve us. But our numbers are dwindling in such so quickly in South Africa. But also our reproduction rates are low and being outproduced, that this poor endangered species won't be around too much longer in anywhere in Africa. And of course, we all know South Africa was a lot better than it is now. He had job opportunities, he had health care, he had consistent electricity. He wasn't enslaved, and many blacks are predicting that should the whites continue to be wiped out in South Africa, that there's going to be a lot of starvation going on in that country, and the blacks are going to suffer right alongside the remainder of the whites who have remained. But I believe we should give them, the white South Africans who want to come here, some type of special dispensation, some type of special break to get over here and become part of this, the kind of immigrant you want, with a respect for your civilization and also skills that we can use, because these people are A, courageous, and B, if they're farmers, then they're certainly could do something over here for us. I don't know what's going to happen. Doubtful it's going to happen. I don't even know what the UN has done about it. Do you know if the UN has addressed at all the white genocide in South Africa?
They've not. I know that Australia has begun to take some of them in, but they're limiting the numbers, which is why they're not just all fleeing to Australia. I do know that Australia has taken a few thousand refugees. They're putting them on waiting lists. It's a very slow process. So.
Well, they need to speed that process up because, as I mentioned earlier, the brutality shown in these attacks is animalistic. Blowtorches for torture, electric shock, merciless beatings, rapes, people tied up while their family members are tortured, beaten, and killed, automatic drills being used on these people. I would be out of there myself, but unfortunately, a lot of them have been impoverished themselves, and I hear there's large homeless communities of white people in South Africa who are just languishing there in these camps. And I don't really know what's going to happen, but I would say that this is a perfect example of the double standard that's being, as you mentioned, with the North Africans or Muslims from Iraq or other war-torn areas coming over to Europe and being embraced. And by the way, I've seen the pictures of France now. You might as well give up on France because France looks to me like it's no longer a white Christian nation. You see the number of Africans and others who are sitting on the steps of Notre Dame all day long, trash all over the place. I'm thinking, what has happened to that country? But it's a warning for all of us that we need to make sure that those people we allow in the country are able to participate in our civilization, but also who want to become, say, Americans or Brits or whatever. And it is helpful. I think it's the exact reason why we don't get them, but it is helpful when they share something with us. A religion, I think, makes it's easier for immigrants to come over. At least they are practicing a faith that is the predominant one still in the United States. Not that we're going to discriminate against that, but they have to be able to fit in some way. Okay, and this is not what's happening. We're getting large numbers of unassimilable people, or people are bending over backwards to make sure that they can retain their own culture and their own beliefs, and which is fine if you want to celebrate those things. But at the end of the day, you need to be an American and speak English, I believe, and be able to contribute to this society in some meaningful way. Exactly what these South Africans would do, and exactly what others were bringing over here is in direct violation of our old immigration laws, which insisted that they bring some skills with them. And that kind of brings us to a peripheral but related news item, which is the way that they manipulate things for the public with the dreamers, right? The scenes of the mothers being separated from the children. And we have an article at American Free Press because a lot of us work for both organizations, or some of us anyway. And there's an article on the American Free Press website, americanfreepress.net, which was posted yesterday about the truth about this whole illegal immigration stuff. But it is one of the purposes of the Barnes Review is not only to bring history and cover the facts, but it's just to try to provide some bastion for conservative belief about history, for rejecting this propaganda that we see. And you know it. All you have to do is turn on the news and listen for 10 minutes, and you'll see that nearly 95% of what's coming out of their mouths is lies. I think the only thing that isn't a lie, they come out and go, stay tuned for a commercial break.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are because you're listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. You like to hear about the latest financial trends and to know what's happening around the world and right here in the United States, the things that can directly impact you, your life, and the life of your family. And if you're like me, you do not rely on the mainstream media to obtain this information because, frankly, you know that you just can't trust them. Fortunately, there is an alternative news outlet with a long-established track record for honesty and integrity, and that is the American Free Press. AFP is the preeminent alternative, independent news source for honest, hard-working, truth-loving Americans. AFP is the antithesis of the controlled, lamestream media. AFP is employee-owned and has been so since its founding. Because of that, AFP never has and never will allow advertisers or special interests or big money to dictate what appears in the pages of the American Free Press newspaper. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. AFP covers the stories and tells the truth that the lamestream media is frankly scared to touch. and AFP offers real, on-the-scene reporting and commentary, the likes of which you will never see in the Washington Post, the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or just about any other lamestream news source that you can think of. That's right, there's only one national populist news weekly staffed by an unsurpassed team of veteran investigative journalists who will dare to rip the veil off of many of the major news stories that are being censored and suppressed by the big money-controlled media monopoly. And that's the American Free Press. AFP publishes exciting, in-depth, uncensored news and information that's grassroots and patriotic, information that Americans need to know in order to combat the growing police state. AFP stands firmly against the New World Order and against those who are working to establish a global plantation under the rule of a powerful few. In short, AFP is your voice. If you have any doubt why they want to silence AFP, you must be relying on the lamestream media for your news, and folks, that's a big mistake. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
And it's all about getting the American public so worked up that they will support this stuff. Although I think the American public is at a point now where we could invade any country we wanted, tell them anything we wanted, and they wouldn't raise a finger. As I've said before, kids today, and by kids I mean anybody under 25, kids today will protest anything: save the whales, save the beaten dogs, save the illegal immigrants, save whatever it is, tear down the monuments. Save the monuments, whatever they want, but they don't seem to be out in large numbers protesting war. And war is the worst thing. This is the other thing about Barnes was he was a pacifist in the end. He just understood that this is just the stupidest way to solve your problems. That human beings should have come further than this, but we seem to have regressed in the United States to the point where we just look to war for everything. We've got our kids watching these violent video games that are warping their brains. We've got a constant propaganda on the news about what horrible beasts the leaders of other countries are and how they need to be removed. And the only way to do this is for the godly United States to go in with their submachine guns and B-52s or B-1, where they use them now, B-1, B-2, stealth bombers and bomb people from 50,000 feet up in the air. And oh my gosh, and our allies, Israel's our allies, still using white phosphorus on people and all kinds of horrific stuff. We're torturing people, for God's sakes. I mean, it's regressed. And so it's time for people to start getting the truth. They really do need to explore some other publications. And if all their place they're getting their news is from the mainstream, because it's all part of the business. The newspapers aren't in the business of giving you the truth; they're in the business of making a profit. American Free Press, on the other hand, is interested in breaking even, so we can print the next issue, right? But telling you, American Free Press, the Barnes Review, Elmer Barnes. There's been a few people. Willis Carto, he was a pacifist at heart because he'd been in war. He got a Purple Heart in the Pacific Theater. And my dad, I think I told you once, he was in World War II and said to me, man, it was horrible every day. People blown up in front of you, heads flying all over here, your friends' blood on. Come on, man. There's got to be a better way for us to solve our problems. And I know people think, you're a dreamer. You're a dreamer that we'll ever have peace. Come on. And I think that we've seen it recently, no matter what happens with it. But Trump actually talking to this North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, is exactly what we should have done forever. You have to talk to your enemies to make peace. You can't just ignore them like John McCain wants to do and threaten them. And these other warmongers we have surrounding him. And I don't know what Trump is at heart. I'm still up in the air. But my gosh, he did more than any other American president to at least bring people to the table to work for peace. And do they really think we want to get in a war with Russia, China, North Korea? Who knows who else?
Well, what the news media is not reporting, but President Trump had a big victory yesterday. There was a North Korean military honor guard that met an American military honor guard at the DMZ and turned over 200 basically bodies of what had been prisoners of war taken in the Korean conflict, men who were basically MIA.
Good, that's interesting. I'm working on a booklet on that now, and there's always more to come up. But you're exactly right. They're going to suppress any accomplishments by Trump, because even though Trump sounds exactly like Harry Elmer Barnes and Willis Carto to some degree, free trade, legal immigration, protecting our borders, trying to pull troops out of foreign nations, although he has been unsuccessful at that so far. I think inevitably that's what he wants to do. Talking peace to your enemies. I think during World War II, the Brits and the Americans even talked to the Germans. So I'm hoping we've moved away from this. It was encouraging to hear Gina Haspel say that torture was over at the CIA. I don't believe it. But we have been on the side of the demons for the past, since 9/11. And really before, because when people say the bankers were behind World War I and behind World War II, well, give me a break. They were probably behind every single war we've ever had, going back to the American Revolution. And people will say this, and you see books on the topic.
I can at least trace their involvement back to the War of 1812.
Yes. Well, yeah, we have a book discussing that at the Barnes Review Bookstore, which has a huge selection of that type of stuff. Great book. By the way, you had a second article in that issue besides the South Africa one. And to wrap up the South Africa discussion, something's got to be done for these people, man.
Yeah.
Something has to be done. They're trapped in time. But South Africa, although it was condemned for its apartheid policies, was still considered an extremely formidable nation to deal with, especially with its wealth. And it's done now, as far as I can tell. I don't know what they're doing with it. Now, we also have, we love to cover other parts of history, of course, but it was interesting, and counter stuff, counter propaganda. You remember that movie a few years ago with Matthew McConaughey, the Free State of Jones, right? And it was a multicultural dream where he married and fell in love with a slave girl and a former slave, whatever it was, and his people rose up against the evil Confederacy in this southern state. They turned it into a real liberal, anti-Charlottesville type of thing. We'll say, that all white people are evil, all Southerners are evil, the whole thing. Well, there were other counties that seceded from the Confederacy, but they didn't do it for the slavery. They didn't own any slaves. These were hill people up in Alabama, poverty-stricken. But they just wanted to be left alone. So they kind of said, look, we're not going to secede along with you, but we're not going to ally with the Union. We're doing this because true Americans believe that we should not involve ourselves in the bloody conflicts of others. Very interesting little article by a guy named Flint Lacey. Basically, the people of Winston County, Alabama, rejected raising arms against their fellow Americans. I guess if everybody had taken this attitude, well, we might not have had the Civil War, and we would have insisted that there be some other solution to our problems, besides running a bayonet through my stomach. That was a good little story, one you're not going to hear either, because there was no juicy, multiracial love affair. For the most part, you're just not going to get it. That, yeah, man, if you want to try to avoid war, you got to stand up and say so. Of course, we know what happened to people in the mass sedition trial who came out against a massive world war. At the time of Roosevelt, they had them all locked up, right? They had to go through the mass sedition trial. And it's not funny, but it's just so ironic, I mean, look at so many big-name people that they accused of being traitors and everything else. And then we also had, we do a listen, there's something else that Barnes Review tries to do, and we can't help everybody. But there are some prisons in the United States. There's a medical facility out there in Kentucky where guys come to, and they're usually ill, and so it's a little bit freer of a prison. It's got walls around it, but we'll occasionally try to help prisoners who reach out to us for some type of cultural enrichment. And this particular group of guys out in prison in Kentucky have been holding for many years, at least the last five years, cultural awareness lectures, and they fill the room. The room is only 30 to 35 people, and Barnes Review was involved in getting a scholar who used to teach at the University of Alabama to show up, to drive the 2 to 3 hours to go out there to give an hour or two lecture inside the prison, and then drive the 3 hours home. Poor guy put a lot of time and effort into it, and it was interesting to go through the process of getting him into that prison. Oh, he had to have his credentials checked, and he couldn't wear orange or khaki. He couldn't wear open-toed shoes. He had to go through 5 monitors with the gates closing behind him. And when you see what happens when those gates close behind you in prison, you never know if you're getting back out again, especially if you're in India or somewhere. I just read about a guy who was arrested for a traffic ticket in India, didn't get out for 9 years. But anyway, it was a good thing. They really enjoyed it. The prisoners get some cultural enrichment. It was Irish heritage this time. Interesting thing is the comments that the scholar made to me. I said, who's smarter, your average, college level student or prisoners? He said it wasn't even close. These prisoners, they have nothing to do but read. They're extremely inquisitive. They ask cogent questions, whereas basically the college student of the day that he taught was more concerned about when his next text was coming in and what he was going to have for where they were going to hang out tonight. So it was an interesting lesson for us all. Again, we don't have the resources to do this all the time, but it's nice to reach out to a segment of the population that's thirsting for some information and is trying to reform themselves. Some of these guys were, walking into a room, and one of them had pled guilty to trying to be involved. He was involved in an assassination plot against Barack Obama. Although, as you and I know, most of these plots start off with an FBI informant going, hey, let's go kill somebody. Right?
Yeah.
I don't think it was this guy's idea. And he's working towards reform. And I think anything we can do to get these guys back out on the street in a better shape than they went in and lead them on the road towards some productivity is not a bad thing. And this is something that white prisoners in particular, I think a couple of black prisoners actually showed up to hear the lecture too. It was about slavery in Barbados, focusing mostly on Irish, but also some information for black and African American prisoners that was of interest to them. That being said, it is something we have in common in racially, and I always say that it's okay for you to work and to be proud of your people no matter who you are, but understand that it can be reformative to learn about your own history and the trials and tribulations you've been through as different ethnic groups, and that you've emerged. I always reject victimhood. The Irish are a perfect example. They easily could have given up and just said, forget it, we're not fighting anymore. It was tens of thousands were slaughtered and imprisoned in British jails during the time, right, during the Irish Civil War and the rising up against the Brits, how the Brits took the land over there, the potato famine, what they did to them. There was no famine. They had plenty of potatoes and food. They just shipped it all off to other countries for profit and forced them to give some large percentage of their crops. The number that were, once you stole the guy's land or you put him out of work and he wanted the countryside with his family, you'd capture them, enslave the kids and the mother maybe. Who knows what was done to them. And the father might be shipped off to Barbados to work in the sugar plantations under the broiling hot sun. And there's some Irish left, but the Redlegs, they're an impoverished group for the most part. They emerged victorious, although not a single Irishman is ever known to, after being sent to Barbados or the plantations in the Caribbean, to ever return home to Ireland. They don't fuss about it. The Irish don't fuss and claim their victims. They get off their butts and they see what they can do to make their lives better. And that's a lesson for us all. So hopefully it's a lesson for these prisoners as well. We also had an article on the Willis Carto Library, which has been put together, online library. Willis had amazing correspondence with some of the big names of the time. And I think I've mentioned to you that the number of FOIA documents we've received over the years on Willis's efforts in the 1960s and 70s was amazing how infatuated the FBI was with his efforts. But during the time, he also communicated with all kinds of people, names that you would know, big nationalists of the period, people on the fence, authors, decision makers, scholars, Taylor Caldwell, Tyler Kent, Alain Devenois, Derevalo Oliver, Lawrence Dennis, Carol Quigley, whoever it may be, William Buckley. That relationship didn't go so well. But all this stuff's been posted online, scanned. His wife has done it. She's really put a lot of time and effort to it. It's always worth it for people to go there. It's www.williscartolibrary.com. I think you'll be impressed and buy something while you're there so you can support her efforts. Back to it, to wrap it up, I would say. So if there's anybody ever out there who wants to subscribe, it's a help. Make a donation. Take a look at us. Get a sample issue. I think they're free if you call 202-547-5586. I'll have to double check that number. But they'll ask them for a sample copy of the Barnes Review and look at it and think about it. And I also say support all kinds of independent news outlets as well, including Dixie Heritage and Free Magnolia and any other ones you can think about. A lot of them don't necessarily, and those groups do, but a lot of the other groups don't necessarily, although we're all nationalists to some degree, don't support us because we're not hard enough. Other ones don't support us because we're too hard on particular subjects. But listen, I don't really care about all that. Just go ahead. We'll support anybody who's out there trying to get an independent version of the truth out there, as long as it is the truth to some degree. And is doing it in a nonviolent fashion. So I always like to wrap up these interviews by encouraging people to get out there and find alternative sources of information. Make up your own mind.
Well, we had an article in this past issue of a book publisher in Germany whose house was raided by the jackbooted thugs, basically kicked his door in and took everything in his house just because his publishing company had published a book that didn't line up to the official government narrative of World War II.
Now, the book was called Tell the Truth and Shame the Devil, written by Gerhard Menuhin, the Jewish son of Jewish violinist, famed Jewish American violinist Yehudi Menuhin. And so the guy who we published in English Menuhin's book, and it did quite well. Castle Hill Publishers is currently doing it. Everybody should get a copy from Castle Hill or from the Barnes Review because we do get it from them. But this man published it in German. It was for scholarly purposes, which if you still have information that falls into that category in Germany, you can be okay, but not when you start talking about war guilt. Adolf Hitler's policies being, besides the internment policy of Jews, even his economic policies being okay. The fact that he didn't beat every dog he saw or whip every woman that he saw is going to get you in trouble. But anyway, this guy published it in German, had a couple copies of the book. They came to his house, as you said, took everything, man. They took his flash drives, his computer, his cell phones. Guys, I think he's getting older, and it's the way he pays his bills, his writing, and they've taken every means with which he can defend himself or to make money to pay for a lawyer. And it's just a sad state of affairs to think that we can't even discuss topics. Now read the book, Tell the Truth and Shame the Devil by Gerhard Menuhin. And he's pretty straightforward. Remember, you're talking about a Jewish author here being pretty honest. Wouldn't call him anti-Semitic, but he's been called anti-Semitic, which is hard to believe. But at any rate, read the book and tell people what you think about it. And if you think it's full of hate and the guy should be locked up for writing the book or publishing the book, well, then maybe you belong in another country. But up until the past several years, really, it's been years they've been pressuring us for writing stuff about World War II history. But it's only been the past couple of years where they had the all-out assault to cut off all revenue from the internet, which is what they worried about. They started worried because they started seeing more questions about whether these events in World War II happened and not how they happened. So the mainstream grip on history is weakening, which is why they've gone to such extreme measures to shut the spigot off for the truth.
When something is so irrefutably true that will kill you if you dare to deny that it happened.
It's so true. And so we think we're on the right track. But we also, as I said earlier, it's a difficult business, especially when the biggest companies in the world come out to suppress you. Google, PayPal, credit card companies, Amex, MasterCard, the Holocaust Memorial Museums, the ADL, the SPLC. There's a combined empire, Amazon Kindle, of billions of dollars that we and other organizations fight on a monthly basis. It's really incredible. Sometimes I look at it that we really are in business anymore, and it's only because of the devotion of the readers we have who appreciate what we're trying to do. You have to agree with everything in every issue of the Barnes Review. As I say, I allow guys to say in this issue for public consumption what I may not believe 100%. But if they have the facts to back it up and their conclusion is different from mine, then it should be allowed to be discussed. There is no subject that shouldn't be allowed to be discussed. Now, you shouldn't be talking about murdering people or the armed revolution against the government and slaughtering public officials, right? Knocking up judges. That's all big no-no.
Well, so, Occupy Wall Street on their Facebook page had a post on Monday. I'm going to print it in the upcoming Dixie Heritage. And they're basically calling on people to go down to the border and murder ICE agents so that these illegal aliens can cross the border without being obstructed by the Border Patrol agents.
Well, there is a double standard, Ed. It's the worst double standard I've ever seen. And that is a liberal conservative. Now, people say, avoid those labels. But as the years have gone on, as I tried to avoid those labels, The past 2 years have redrawn those labels for me. It really is liberals who are more interested in men being able to go to the bathroom in a women's room than slaughtering 100,000 Syrians through economic sanctions or bombing Iran, right? I don't get it. And all I can say is anybody who is worried more about who's going to the bathroom in what room, we all know where you should go, by the way.
Yeah.
but they're not worried about the slaughter. We're a twisted little nation, and part of that is really our separation from our true history. Everybody's true history. Everybody's got something to be proud of. Everybody should be proud of their people. But right now we're not. And they would consider that racist for me to say that white people are discriminated against.
Yeah.
Right? Well, one day we won't be around to talk about it because the old white tiger isn't going to be around anymore. By the way, I missed one of the articles, a really great one. It was your interview with Ben Jones.
What was it that, as an editor, what was it that made you decide that what had been a radio interview should be converted into a print article?
Well, first of all, he has a name, and he was a U.S. congressman. So anybody, former U.S. congressman, so anybody of some notoriety who is willing to speak with us is someone we want to talk to. Even if a guy in the street that I didn't know had said this, I don't think it carries the weight that a former U.S. congressman does. But more than that, it was Ben Jones is an awesome guy. Ben Jones, and you know more than I, but I'll encapsulate it and throw in anything you want. But Ben Jones grew up in the poor side of the tracks, right, in a black neighborhood, and had black friends, but couldn't go to the diners with black friends because black people were not allowed. And that made him want to work for civil rights. Of course, his point is the civil rights movement was hijacked, and that Mr. Dr. King, who he knew, had no problem, according to ex-Rep. Jones's interview, with the Confederate flag or Confederate symbolism. I feel like that the news media and sometimes even the Barnes Review and some of our writers concentrate too much on what separates us all as Americans. I'm happy with the Americans we have here now. We don't need anybody else coming in, right?
Right.
The South Africans will take if they're productive. That we concentrate so much on what divides us because there must be money in it. And this is basically the news media, but sometimes, as I say, our own people. Ben talks about making life better for everybody. And that as Americans and as Southerners, and I'm on the border there. I came from Maryland, but I live in Virginia now. So I'm getting better. I should move down to Florida. But that everybody needs to go along together, and we can do it. That what binds Southerners, and probably maybe Northerners, but not so much Northerners and Westerners, and maybe Westerners because they have a pioneer spirit. I don't know. The left coast is completely weird now, but in a lot of places. But Southerners are bound by Southern culture. And to tear down the statue and hide that past is to deny a black man, if he wants to go up to a statue of lady and look at it and say, you sorry jerk, right, you had slaves. If that's what he wants to do and that's what he feels, that's fine. But it means that we can also go up to a statue there and talk to this person about what we think about it, what we thought was horrible about slavery, what we thought was going to happen, why we thought Robert E. Lee was a great man, not a horrible man. But that debate is gone now because there's nothing but empty pedestals. And pretty soon there'll be the other culture heroes there that are more multicultural and more inclusive in the eyes of the cultural Bolsheviks who run the show here. And so I just really felt like Ben Jones's message was one I could really grab onto. So that's why I thought that should go into the... Plus, he's a good speaker. I mean, some interviews are a lot of ums and ahs. This was a great one, and he knows what he's talking about, and he's been there. So enjoyed it. I think everybody should read it. Everybody should at least listen to it at barnesreview.org.
Cut the interview off there because that's all the time that we have for this week's TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour. I appreciate you taking the time once again this week to join us for this brief moment in radio. And we really do appreciate the fact that you're our listener. Invite you to come back again next week to this same place, to this wherever you've listened to us at this week. Come back again next week. And we'll be back, and we'll be here, hopefully, to encourage you in the culture war once again. I want to encourage you to go to the Barnes Review website, www.barnesreview.org. Paul had mentioned in our discussion the radio interview that I did with Cooter, with Ben Jones, the former congressman, the former Dukes of Hazzard actor. And I'd like to encourage you, when you're at the Barnes Review website, not only to check out the magazine, but also to check out the back episodes of the radio show. and particularly the 2 interviews that I did with Congressman Ben Jones with Cooter. I know that you'll enjoy those interviews. Even if you've heard them originally, you'll enjoy listening to them again. And I know that you'll enjoy reading this upcoming issue of the Barnes Review. Of course, I've already had the privilege of reading it in advance. I was one of the editors doing some of the editorial work on the magazine, and so I got to read it almost a month ago. And let me just tell you, this is one of the best issues of the Barnes Review that I think has been out yet. And so you'll really enjoy it. Also, check out my website, www.dixieheritage.net. I want to send you a free copy of my book, The Truth About the Confederate Battle Flag. And also, I want to send you a free copy of my weekly email newsletter, the Dixie Heritage Letter. So be sure to go to www.dixieheritage.net. Give us your email address, and we want to get those free materials out to you as soon as possible. So for all of us here at TBR Radio presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, thank you once again, and God bless. See you next week.